But no question, this is one of the most effective ways to make your tours more memorable. Hi there, Kelsey Toner here, founder of Guest Focused Tour Business Coaching, where every day myself and our team of experienced tour and activity business coaches are helping you build a thriving, profitable business. Welcome back to our series on how to design a tour that guests will never forget. In this series, we're sharing frameworks and tools on how to make your tours as memorable as possible, as well as sharing lots of best practices and real-world examples from some of the most incredible tours on the planet. In this video, we're going to be looking at how to leverage all 5 senses when you are designing a tour. Let's dive in. Our brains as human beings are wired to create stronger memories when multiple senses are engaged. Each additional sense we activate creates new neural pathways, making experiences more deeply embedded in memory. It's why you might forget what a place looked like, but still remember how it smelled, felt, or sounded years later. I think we all know this instinctively. I recently had the opportunity to go back to my family home and be there for Christmas with my family. And all of the sounds and smells that came back to me were incredibly powerful and were dredging up all this nostalgia and all the happy memories of Christmases from when I was very young. But it was more than just seeing these things. It was very much the smell of sweets and treats being baked in the oven, the clanging of the pots and pans, the smell of the fresh Christmas tree, all of that combined together is what made so many of these memories so easy to recall so many years later. And all of this is backed up by scientific studies. Multi-sensory experiences are remembered up to 70% longer. They're recalled more vividly, they're shared more often, and they're connected to stronger emotions. If you want to design an unforgettable tour, a tour that's remembered decades later in the minds of your guests, the choice is obvious. We've got to engage all of these senses. For inspiration, let me walk you through how one tour leader, one operator in Madeira created this incredible experience that touched all the 5 senses. And I had the pleasure of being on this tour, and this was decades ago, pre-kids, previous centuries, long time ago, but I'll always remember. Simply, we were on a Jeep tour. But one of the stops, one of the things he wanted to talk about was all the eucalyptus trees that we were seeing on the dry side of Madeira, which is an island kind of off of Africa. And so on this dry side, the eucalyptus tree is actually an invasive species. But I want to walk you through how he systematically engaged all of our senses. So one of the first things we did was obviously pull over in that Jeep and have a look at the eucalyptus tree. We were able to touch one, feel one. The bark is really unique on a eucalyptus tree. But he said, crumble up the leaves. If you haven't done that before, it's obviously this really incredible smell. But he said, I also want you to feel some of the oil that comes off of those leaves. That oil is actually a huge problem here in Madeira because it causes what? It causes really hot fires. So when, and this consistently happens every dozen years or so, you have a really serious fire on Madeira, it's because of this oil that's in these eucalyptus trees. They burn hot, and it's hard to put out. Then when we got back into the car, we obviously would bring those leaves with us. We could smell them, we could touch them. But then he said, but one of the upsides of this has been essentially eucalyptus is used in a lot of local products. And so there's a candy making factory that's right in the downtown area. And he said, I grew up eating these eucalyptus candies because the trees have been here for a very long time. And sure enough, we were able to pass around and then have this eucalyptus candy that was made from the very trees that we had just been looking at. Now, he could have shared all of that information just by pointing, just by talking. But what a perfectly designed experience that no doubt they're able to recreate on every single one of those Jeep tours. And what a much more memorable way to engage with all of those details. When I think of the island of Madeira, I think of that particular moment, probably because it engaged so many of my senses on so many different levels. In the next section, let's go through each of the 5 senses, and we'll continue to go through some of these real-world examples to give you inspiration on how you can incorporate some of these senses into your tours and experiences. First, let's start with visuals and sight. I want to encourage you to go beyond just pointing things out, but instead thinking about creating visual moments. This can be something as simple as framing the perfect photo opportunity. I remember a local tour leader in Bruges, Belgium, guided us to one of the most iconic and photographed spots in all of the medieval city. And he showed us where to stand, exactly how to hold the camera, what to point at to get the perfect photograph of our experience in Bruges. Maybe we can direct attention to hidden details. I remember visiting a medieval church in France. And one of the unique things about that church was how it had been built so that on the equinox, the sunlight would shine in and perfectly create this pathway of light from the entrance of the church all the way up to the cross. Now, before we got to the church, I actually created a small model, and using an orange, I showed how the church was built and the orientation so that when they went to the visit, they could look up at those windows and they could appreciate that visual detail they may have otherwise missed. Is there a way that you can create contrast and surprise with some of the visuals on your tour? I remember leading the tours in Normandy and on Omaha Beach when we're standing out on this grassy knoll. I printed out and brought some of those visual aids so that you could see a photo that was taken from right where you were standing that showed all of the guns, the bunkers, all of the anti-tank things that were strewn all over the beach before the D-Day invasion. And what an important visual contrast that was. Another best practice is to create kind of reveal or kind of wow moments. And so I remember we were leading bike tours and we were at Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and they have obviously some spectacular ancient temples. But I remember designing the tour that we would stop kind of in the jungle and we would talk a little bit about the temple and try to actually put ourselves with a little storytelling in the minds of some of the first people who would have seen or discovered these ancient wonders. And then as we came around the corner, that temple in all its glory was revealed. Okay, what about sound and the sense of hearing? Sound shouldn't just be about narration, but it should be about intentionally focusing attention. I'd love to share with you my experiences in the Jenolan caves, which are in the Blue Mountains near Sydney, Australia. And the Jenolan caves are, one of the largest cave complexes and really visually stunning. But they did some really, really creative and powerful things with the sense of hearing as well. So one of the things that they did is when we went in, they were playing some local music. The acoustics of these caves, and especially one particular room, the Sydney Orchestra and various other groups had come through and done recordings, but they had actually set up speakers. They would actually shut the lights off and we could hear all of this music. And it created this nice contrast where we almost like muffled or turned off these other senses to better appreciate all those sounds. In the cave, I remember in another room, they turned all the lights off and we listened to the steady, slow drips of water that were making those incredible stalactites and stalagmites. Is there a quiet moment on your tour where you might be able to pause and draw the group's attention to something that might have been otherwise missed? Another opportunity that I find many tours overlook in their design is layering in music to maybe create atmosphere or humor. Music is incredibly powerful. And so you may have heard me tell the story of setting up that perfect French picnic and having Edith Piaf and La Vie en Rose drifting over the whole thing. But the same thing applied when we were in Vietnam and we were having a lunch partway through our bike ride. And I remember we hired some local musicians to come in and create this real ambiance of the beautiful temple grounds that we were sitting in. What about our sense of smell? Well, smell creates some of our strongest memories. When we're designing our tours, think about engaging deeper with markets, vendors, bakeries, and restaurants. Maybe lean into passing around some of the raw ingredients to interact with and smell more closely. Whenever possible, try and tell a story related to or behind the aroma. Who are the people that live and breathe or ultimately create these scents day in and day out? And this is so important. Just smelling a bunch of stuff is much less impactful or much less memorable than connecting that particular scent into the story or the theme of your tour. The other thing I love to do is anytime that there's maybe a seasonal smell or there's something unique to that time of year when the guests are there, is to lean in. There's often sensory experiences that are seasonal in nature. And it's a great way of making people feel special and making it extra memorable by framing it and saying, wow, you're so lucky that you're here right now because we're able to smell the wild lavender or smell the cherry blossoms. Or even something as, well, hey, it's pouring rain on this tour of Vancouver Island. Well, there's no better time to truly experience the rainforest with that wet, earthy smell that comes from a heavy rain. All right, what about taste? Can non-food tours incorporate the sense of taste? Absolutely. I think all tours should share some type of small local candy or snack on every single tour. It's such low-hanging fruit. We were recently on this incredible tour in Kyoto in Japan, where one of the creative things that they did is they actually just got a lot of the sort of like treats or snacks that young kids would have in school or as a special treat on the weekend. And I got to try my first squid flavored candy snacks, really, really unique stuff that is often just taken for granted, maybe in your city or in your region or in your culture. Sticking with that theme of seasonality, is there anything that you can share that they can only get at that time of year? I remember on our bike tours, we were always sourcing and finding fresh local produce to share, from grapes maybe right off the vine in the fall, or fresh cherries in Provence in the spring. Perhaps you can create taste surprises or educational experiences. As I was designing this multi-day bike tour in Burgundy, I realized that we didn't really talk about or get to experience Dijon mustard. And so I bought some artisanal mustards. In every tour, we had a nice way to taste some of the beauty and nuance of the Dijon mustard versus other kinds. A really memorable educational experience that was built around just that sense of taste was actually in the country of Italy. And what we did was we took 4 small samples, let's say, of Pinot Grigio. And what we were trying to do was get used to the mouth feel of wines in Italy that had like a higher alcohol content, or wines that were more acidic, or the tannin levels. A lot of these terms are thrown around, and this exercise was really powerful in educating the palate. So basically you start with a small glass of Pinot Grigio, that's kind of your control. In the next one, you would take a shot of vodka and you would add it to that Pinot Grigio. So it didn't really impact the flavor, but as you tasted it, it had a significantly higher alcohol content. And what you could do was you could feel what a high alcoholic content, obviously that was ramped way up, but you could feel the heat that comes from alcohol. The next thing that we did was add acidity. I think we took a lemon juice and added it, and then we could feel the salivation that comes from a wine that has a higher acidity versus a lower acidity. And finally, those tannins. So we had oversteeped some tea and we poured it into that Pinot Grigio, and you could feel right there on your cheeks. That's what, that feeling that you're feeling right now, that pucker, that's tannins. Now, what did this do aside from ruining probably a handful of glasses of wine? It created a really memorable sensory experience that wasn't just about tasting those things, but actually educational, and obviously a really powerful lesson because of the way that it was structured. And finally, let's round things out with that sense of touch. And I often find touch is overlooked in people's tour design. Now, I've been on a lot of wine tours and wine experiences over the years, but one of the most memorable was actually by a fellow named Franck, who was up in the Chablis region in France. And he elevated this wine experience by focusing in on touch versus exclusively some of the other elements that we think of, like normally smelling and tasting, right? And so one of the things that Franck did is when we were working with him, he would bring along lots and lots of things for us to touch and feel. So the terroir around Chablis is actually made up of a very unique limestone-y sort of soil. And so we were able to pass around some of these rocks and actually feel it and feel the chalkiness of it. He would have some fossils. He said, well, hey, let's try and understand why the soil is like this. And then we were able to see the fossils, and for hundreds and thousands and millions of years, this was all compressed down into this soil that gives that Chablis and the Pinot Gris grapes in that area and why they're so special. He would also, as he was talking about the life cycle of the grape and the notion of these vines that have been here for hundreds of years, he actually had a baguette, which is the part of the vine that they grow sort of horizontally. And we were able to get up close and personal and actually feel this part of the vine, which I simply hadn't done before. And it just goes to show how being intentional, thinking, hey, almost like a checklist. Hey, am I hitting all of these senses? Where is there a gap? Is there something that I could bring so that I'm really trying to hit as many as possible? So on your journey to enhancing your tours by leveraging these 5 senses, look for natural sensory opportunities. As just mentioned, is there some place where you're not tapping into one of the senses? Can you ground these sensory experiences in the stories or theme of your tour? Are there any places to build in sensory surprises? Are there props or objects or visual aids that you can bring along to enhance the tour? And as always, in your tour documentation, lay out how you want that sensory moment to go. Remember, you don't need to force sensory experiences into every moment of your tour. And keep in mind, it might even be more impactful to focus on just one sense at a time, like in some of the examples we shared. But no question, this is one of the most effective ways to make your tours more memorable. We as human beings have some very diverse ways of experiencing the world around us. And you, as a world-class tour designer, should be tapping into every single one of those senses on every single one of your tours. Thanks so much for being here. I hope you got some inspiration from the video here today. Let me know in the comments below, what are some of the ways that you tap into the senses on your tour? Was there a particularly memorable experience that you had maybe years ago, decades ago, that still sticks with you? I'd love to hear about it. Also, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe, share it with a friend or colleague. It would mean the world to us. If you want to learn more about our resources for designing, marketing, and selling profitable tours, you can book a free call with one of our coaches. We'd love to hear from you and give you a free session on how you can have more success in your tour business. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you in the next video.